This right here is a gravel bike, or is it? Behind me is the new Cervelo Áspero-5. It's a 5th generation bike from Cervelo of their race gravel bike platform. And I'll tell you right now, I think it's a pretty good gravel bike. But what if I were to tell you that this might be just one of the most interesting road bikes I've ridden in years? Now hear me out. The Áspero name, or Aspero, depending on who you ask, is definitely going to be a gravel bike platform. They have the Caledonia for their all-road / endurance bike. They have the R series and the S series for directly road-going activities. However, the Áspero has always kind of gone towards the road bike side of the platform. They've always had quicker handling than a lot of gravel bikes. They've always been focused on stiffness, and they haven't had the most as far as tire clearance is concerned. Quick build rundown of the Áspero-5. As I said, this is the top spec build right here, $12,500 US. Gets you the SRAM XX drivetrain right here with the power meter built in, SRAM red cranks, SRAM red levers, and brake calipers right here. The Reserve 4044 GR wheels right here with the DT Swiss 240 EXP hubs. You get the Vittoria Corsa Pro control tires in a 48mm width, and you get the custom 2-piece handlebar from Cervelo that Cervelo is actually speccing across the lineup. As of now, at launch, there are going to be 2 models that this bike is launching with. You're getting also a Force Access version of this bike at $8,700. That gets you the same Reserve 4044 rims with a DT Swiss 350 hub, and then you're getting a SRAM Force level of this drivetrain with the same 48-tooth chainring, a power meter, and the 10 to 52-tooth cassette. Also available in North America is going to be the Áspero-5 frame set at $5,500 US, and what that gets you is frame, fork, headset, seat post, as well as those handlebars too. That makes this bike pretty firmly in the premium priced bike bracket. It comes in line with the Caledonia 5 as far as pricing is concerned. I think it's fairly premium, and it's, you know, it's not quite as wild as what I was seeing from the Lab 71 version of that Cannondale Synapse we reviewed earlier this year, but it is a lot of money still. All right, so it's a hot one out here. I am slightly regretting my decisions, but impressions with the bike, great climber. You look at the gearing, the 48-tooth big chainring is kind of scary looking on a gravel bike, but if you actually look at the gear inch calculators and that type of thing, it's pretty darn equivalent to a 40 or 42-tooth chainring with the 10 to 46 cassette in the low gear. I don't find it that big of a deal. It is probably a little bit undergeared for what I am doing, but I want to say that this bike is an excellent climber, but because of the slick tires, I can't quite get there. I have to really focus on making sure I have weight over that rear wheel to make sure that it's hooking up over this looser or hard pack stuff. We have a lot of steep climbs to come. I think that'll really test the bike. So far, if I'm completely honest, I've been really hesitant to let it rip on the descents. I'm not a great descender on the dirt, frankly, and unlike the best descenders who are really comfortable with letting their bikes kind of slip underneath them and flop around a little bit on the dirt, I'm not super comfortable with that. I would prefer some grip, and these tires aren't really offering it. But when it flattens out, it gets hard pack really, really fast. Feels like a road bike. Who'd have thought? All right, let's keep going. Okay, quick stop out here before we have a little bit of descending followed by a onslaught of VO2 max, basically. Lots of steep, rutted out climbs, loose. Couple things that I really like about this Áspero-5, the handlebars. The handlebars, the tops are phenomenal. They are huge, they have a slight back sweep, and it just feels ergonomically sound. The flare on the bars is good. It's maybe a little bit more than I would prefer, but for a gravel bike like this, completely appropriate. I think a lot of people will be happy with this bar. Other things to note, this bike is stiff riding. The near vertical seat post that's inspired from the S5 and is pulled from the Soloist isn't going to be the most comfortable solution, and you really feel it out here. It is relying heavily on these 42mm tires to give you some level of compliance out here. You take a look at that over there, just coming up from there. We have several of those to come. It really pushes the limits of a gravel bike. It's certainly going to push the limits of this Áspero-5. Let's find out how it does. Oh, I'm losing it. Oh, gosh dang it. Okay, in case you're wondering, Alvin, why didn't you finish the dirt climb? And that is because I slipped too many times and I was tired of climbing on dirt. Is that a skill issue? Maybe to a degree, but it's also slicks right here. As a matter of fact, drop a comment down below, tell me how much worse your climbs are than mine are. And we're gonna go down now. Okay, so quick wrap up. Descending, fantastic. Handling is quick, not super duper like aggressive, but feels really good. One thing to note, ooh, as I almost slipped right there. One thing to note, the handling numbers might say that this is pretty similar to a racy road bike or even more than all road bikes out there, but the wider tire kind of takes away some of the precision that you might get. Overall, descends a lot like a road bike, feels like a road bike that doesn't have the 42 mil tires that this does, both for better and for worse. And I keep thinking about that number, the 34 watts, and the compromises and the bonuses that come with that number. All right, if you excuse me, I am cramping like crazy. That is not good. So I'm gonna get home, find some grass, and lay on it and stretch. All right, we're back from this ride. I'm gonna be honest, made some poor decisions nutritionally, but we're here. Anyways, quick recap on this bike. On the flats, again, a lot like a road bike, quite a bit of stability. However, when you are on dirt and it gets really chunky, the quicker handling up front, the shorter trail figures, meaning the bike does like to move around a little bit more than what you might get from most other gravel bikes, even on the racy side of the spectrum. As you might expect, that quicker handling also means that if you are descending on dirt or on single track or something like that, this bike is a little bit of a handful. It requires a fair bit of skill to get the most performance out of it. On the road, however, again, feels like a road bike, feels really good. That being said, I do think all of that is largely defined by one number, the number 34, which I think defines the rest of this bike. Now, the number 34 refers to how much energy this bike will save you aerodynamically over the next fastest gravel bike out there, according to Cervelo. And as you might be able to tell, Cervelo had to make a lot of choices with this bike, not necessarily concessions, but choices to get to that number. You have stuff like this really wild chain catcher, which is by far the most low profile chain catcher I've seen on a gravel bike. You have stuff like this curved seat tube right here. You have that deep head tube area. You have the aero handlebars as well. The seat tube is probably the most aggressively aero focused part of the bike, and it's certainly going to lead to some compromises. The 45 mil tire clearance refers to the clearance out back. 42 mil tires, plenty of room to spare. However, it does get pretty tight with a 45, and I would be very hesitant to ride this in the mud, even though Cervelo says this bike's not really designed to be ridden in the mud anyways. Next up has to be those handlebars, which have probably the most aggressive aero top that I've seen out of the box from any gravel bike. It really is wide, and for my kind of smaller size, small to medium hands, it is a little bit harder to wrap around than I thought it might otherwise be. That being said, Cervelo says that this two-piece system saves 5.7 watts over a standard system found on the Aspero 5 of the outgoing generation. And so in essence, it feels like the top of an aero road bar with the bottom of a gravel bar, which I am personally a pretty big fan of, but it is interesting to see on a bike like this. What is also more interesting, I think, is the two-piece system. Most of these gravel bikes, particularly ones with these SRAM Red builds, are gonna come with a one-piece system. As far as other aero bits are concerned, you have a fairly deep head tube that is kind of shaped inward to match the fork profile. You have a seat post, the SP27. The design is shared with the Cervelo Soloist. However, this is a new zero offset system, and it's been simplified according to Cervelo, but it kind of tells you where this bike is focused, not necessarily on comfort, but more so on performance. And then you have some of the results of that 34 watts that are claimed to be saved. You have really big gearing, 48 tooth chainring on a gravel bike. I've never seen that spec'd on a complete bike out of the box, especially when it's paired to that 10 to 52 tooth chainring, which isn't the newest Explorer drivetrain with the 1x13 drivetrain. Instead, you get 12 gears in the back. Cervelo says that this gets you the low gear of those Explorer group sets, but it gets you a high gear, perfect for sprinting. That's going to be a 4810, equivalent to what you might find on a road bike. And then we get to the tires, which aren't just gravel slicks, they're just straight up road tires. I hit up Vittoria because I'd never seen these Corsa Pro control tires in a 42mm width. They say that's coming out later this year, but it was made specifically for companies like Cervelo because they wanted something that met the requirements that they were looking for. And according to Vittoria, this is just a Corsa Pro that you're gonna get in a standard road casing, just made wider and the same puncture protection as well. And now you're probably wondering why Cervelo has gone to the length of essentially working with Vittoria to make a tire specifically for this bike. And according to Cervelo, they said they went through all of the tires that they can get their hands on. They did all the aero testing that they could, and they found that aero testing wasn't as simple as choosing a slick tire. They had to have specific profiles, they had to have specific knob patterns as well, that some slicks were actually slower than some semi-knobby tires out there as well. And they found that this got the most performance out of the bike for the goals that they were looking for. Which I should mention that Cervelo says that the goal for this bike isn't something like Unbound, which makes sense because there's not a lot of mud clearance in the back, but instead it's for fast, loose, dry races like UCI Gravel Worlds, SBT Gravel, and BWR California, which I should mention until recently, a lot of people are racing that bike, that ride on road bikes. And in case you're wondering, this bike does excellent as a road bike. Now, I think this is a particularly interesting proposition because it kind of checks the boxes in a way that not a lot of bikes on the market do. See, it's got the big tire clearance, but the fit measurements right here are actually pretty aggressive and they're more like a race road bike than the endurance or all-road bikes that we have on the market today. Compare this to the Caledonia 5, this bike is longer and it's lower. The same goes to the NV Frey or the BMC Road Machine. This bike just feels positionally, when I'm on the bike, more like a race road bike. That being said, you have great comfort from these Corsa Pro Control tires. It doesn't have the snap that you're gonna get from a road bike with even like a 35mm wide tire because of the additional rolling resistance and the extra air that you have between you and the ground. It also means that tire pressure becomes a little bit more important for you to consider because if it's too low, it'll feel sluggish. If it's too high, it'll kind of just pitter patter down the road. Overall, it gives me big tire clearance. It gives me the body positioning that I am looking for that's a little bit more aggressive than an all-road bike. And it feels pretty darn quick out on the road too. Now, I have to analyze this bike as a gravel bike because that's what Cervelo says that it is. But if they were to call this the Caledonia 5 or call it a road bike, I would almost certainly say that this is one of my very favorite road bikes on the market. Admin reveal, you join me without a helmet post-ride with all this hair here, and I've just washed off this Aspero 5. I should probably have dried it off beforehand, and I want to talk about some things I've noticed as I built the bike. And this one kind of actually came in pieces, so I got to take a good look at what this frame was about. Starting up front, this comes with a two-piece handlebar, which on the SRAM Red build, I wouldn't have necessarily expected. Most bike brands are including a one-piece handlebar right here, and they were able to make this easier for adjustability's sake and to swap out bars as you please. I found that this was a really easy handlebar to set up. The holes are quite big, both at the ends and at the levers, and you can set this up with a standard stem if you wanted to in the aftermarket. It isn't the most elegant solution. A one-piece handlebar certainly looks cleaner, but given the choice, I would choose this two-piece system over a one-piece handlebar basically any day of the week. If we come on down to the fork, they have a somewhat unique front brake caliper mount right here. It's got a through bolt right here. It's a 160mm native. I personally like these systems more than the kind of standard adapter that you're gonna find on these bikes because I find that these are a little bit easier to set up. The seat post right here is a 0mm offset, which is new to the Aspero 5. It is the same basic SP27 seat post as you're gonna find on the Cervelo Soloist. So if you want to swap to a different setback than the 0mm offset, you could totally do that relatively easily. There is a seat post wedge in here, which you can lose, but it is curved in the frame in such a way that it won't fall out all that easily. It is something you're gonna wanna take out when you travel, however. Moving on down to the down tube, we do have a down tube storage hatch. It is Cervelo's own design, and it is relatively narrow. It looks a lot like letter slot, which is pretty darn narrow. Cervelo actually says, hey, we're not designing this as a catch-all storage situation. It is designed for a tube, a multi-tool, and some CO2s. And in that situation, I think it works okay. You get two neoprene sleeves in here. They slot in relatively easily. And new to this is something that I complained about, is the Caledonia 5. I did not care for this system because it really limited the type of bottle cage that I can use. Cervelo has not only redesigned this storage hatch, so it has 2 different mounts for the bottle cages, but they also include Arundel mandible cages included with the bike. As for compatibility, it's still not amazing. I found that I actually have to take out both bottles or at least the seat tube bottle, to really get a hang of this. On that note, if you look inside of this down tube storage area, you'll find that the rear brake hose is kind of just floating in there. It's got foam wrapping around it to keep it quiet, but it is just floating in there, unlike the Cannondale Synapse, which was really nicely routed. I think the elephant in the room as far as maintenance and long-term longevity for this bike is going to be this curved seat tube right here, which is almost for sure gonna pick up any pebbles or like rocks, what have you, as you ride along. If I were to own this bike, I would almost certainly put some sort of helicopter tape around this, but that would also eat in just a little bit into that maximum tire clearance. Overall, I think the build quality of Cervelo is pretty darn good. You just gotta worry about like scraping up that seat tube, which... All right, Cervelo Áspero 5, highs, lows, who this bike is for. Let's start with the highs. I think as a gravel bike, I appreciate the gearing. I appreciate the wide range. The 48 tooth chainring does look awfully scary and way too pro for me. However, paired with the 10 to 52 tooth cassette, it gives you the same gearing as an Explorer bike with a 46 tooth cassette and a 40 or a 42 tooth chainring. I do appreciate this bike is relatively easy to maintain if you're a home mechanic to a degree. You have stuff like the threaded bottom bracket. I also appreciate the 2-piece handlebar, which isn't the most elegant looking system, but it works really well, and I like that I can get the adjustment that I need out of the bars too. And as a gravel bike, I think the handling is relatively sorted. I think most people are gonna be better suited by a bike that doesn't quite have the sharp edge that this does as far as handling is concerned. But for me, I quite like it, and I love it on the road. As far as the lows are concerned, I think that if you're buying this as a gravel bike, these tires are a little bit of a miss. The grip just isn't there. You're really gonna have to consider what type of terrain you're riding on. I should also mention that ultimately, I think the ride quality on this bike, while it's decent with these tires, it isn't gonna be as comfortable as most of the gravel bikes out there. And I do think that overall, while I think this bike is fairly comfortable, particularly with these tires, this frame, I think inherently is not the most comfortable or absorbent frame out there on the market. Who's this bike for? I think it's a good rider for the people who want to ride the SPT Gravels of the world, the BWR Californias of the world, or the UCI Gravel World Championships of the world, where the terrain is smooth and fast and dry. However, if you're like me and you're willing to take the plunge on something that's a little bit different, I think this bike is a phenomenal road bike. That's it, everyone. Cervelo Áspero 5 first ride impressions. If you're looking for more nerdy tech details, we'll have them in the link down below, or for our first full ride review up now on Velo, you should go check that out. And let us know down below, has Cervelo gone too far with this bike? Is it too much like a road bike? Or is that even a bad thing necessarily? Let us know. We'll see you on the next one. Happy trails.